Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner with a special edition of the Robust Opposition, daytime edition, which we are doing to accommodate my guest schedule. And my guest is Yurii Sheliazhenko, who is coming to us live from Kiev right now in the middle of the Ukraine war zone. How you doing, Yurii, all things considered?
Hello, Laurel. Thank you for inviting me. And things are not great in Kiev. We have here Russian missile attacks, and it is usual situation when I hear distant explosions and air raid sirens. Sometimes my home is shaking, but I can't leave Ukraine because of this universal ban to all men in age from 18 to 60 to leave the country. I can't seek any opportunities to leave the country with family and seek for safety. Still, I remain here with my people, with my country, and here from Kiev, I call Ukrainian government for peace talks and nonviolent resolution of current conflict, and other governments, Russian government, to stop this indeed obscene and illegal war against Ukraine, to engage in peace talks in good faith. Okay. And also, since this conflict is bigger than Ukraine, I call also for other governments, first of all, United States government to engage in peace talks and help to achieve peace. Many people are not friendly to pacifists now in Ukraine, but we are working on world peace, and it is our mission.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about what you called for and the solutions a little bit later in the show, but first I wanted to introduce you to the viewers. You are the executive secretary of something called the Ukrainian Pacifist Movement. You're also a board member of the European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, and a board member of World Beyond War, which is an organization started by my friend, fellow peace activist David Swanson. You obtained your Master of Mediation and Conflict Management degree in 2021 and a Master of Laws degree in 2016 at KROK University. In addition to your participation in the peace movement, you're a journalist, blogger, human rights defender, legal scholar, author of academic publications, and a lecturer on legal theory and history. So welcome to the show. I've got some questions that I wanted to ask you, but let's get back to what we were just speaking about, which is what life is like being in a war zone. I assume you're a peace activist, but you've never lived in a war zone. So what is your day-to-day life like? Like, how do you go out and get food or anything else that you need? What's the situation with your friends? Are they gone? Have the men stayed to fight and send their families out? Do you have people you know who are living in the subway? Talk about what life is like there.
Well, I stay in home with my family, and we are in a situation as many people in Kiev. We have some basic needs satisfied. We have electricity, we have internet. Now it is interact. Our conversation is directly from Kiev, and we have water. we have central heating, but tomorrow it will be disabled because there is spring coming and no need in central heating. As for food, supermarkets and some apteeks are working, so foods and medicals are accessible, but there are, of course, a problem is that many people are going here, and it is a lot of queue of people, queue such as you should wait in this queue hour or hour and a half, you know. Some basic foods like bread, like water to drink and so on. For now, some basic needs are covered, and it is possible to stay home and a part of these disturbing noises of war. Here in the center of Kiev, it is still possible to live. Also, if war will come more closer to here, to center of Kiev, we have subway to hide, we have some shelters and so on. And also, it would be great if our government reconsider this decision to try to make soldiers from all men. It is just unbelievable decision in 21st century, completely ignoring reality of unwilling of many people to participate in war.
Okay, so are you saying that that of all the refugees, the however many millions of people who have left Ukraine, none of them are men, or if there are men, that those men are leaving illegally?
Some opportunities for men to leave the country exist. Mostly, of course, women and children are evacuating. And by the way, some students of African and Asian descent complained that women and children, Ukrainians, have more opportunities and more decent treatment during this evacuation of refugees from Ukraine. It was indeed a lot of reports in international media about discrimination in this process of refugees leaving the country. For men, according to legislation, of course, citizens of other countries have no obligations to fight for Ukraine, but our border guard take a lot of efforts to recruit citizens of other countries, and especially students of African and Asian descent to Ukrainian army. there were such reports. I saw one of them in ABC News. And there are some legal ways for men to leave the country. If you are younger than 18 or older than 60, if you have permission or certificate from the military which allow you to leave the country on grounds, for example, of unfitness to military service, but it is hard to obtain this certificate. My friend, a lawyer, tried to evacuate old father, age 59, to evacuate from Ukraine to have oncological operation abroad, and her father indeed needs it. And this territorial center for recruitment and social care, former military commissariat, basically the military, refused to give needed certificate. There are many reports about bribery. Some for illegal way for men to leave a country vary from $5,000, $7,000. Recently, our law enforcement stopped corrupted scheme of helping men to cross the border for a bribe of $10,000.
Okay, let me move
so
on.
They had some complicated scheme, like fake deportation and so on.
Yeah, let me cut. If I'm cutting you off, it's because I just want to be able to get to all of my questions in the hour. So yes, I'm a pacifist, as are you. And I am such a pacifist that when my sons, they're 25 and 28, when they would receive letters from the Selective Service after they were turned 18, asking them to register, I tore up the letters. And I did up a lot of research about this, and I was worried. I didn't want them to be prosecuted for not, joining the Selective Service. And I did some research and found out that the only people that were ever prosecuted were the few people that decided to make a public political statement about it. So what happened was my plot was foiled because I moved to North Carolina last year, and in order for my son to get his driver's license, he had to join the Selective Service. But he turns 25 tomorrow, and apparently after 25, they can't make you go fight. But my point in asking this question to you is, even though I'm a pacifist, I would think that if somebody came, if my country was under attack and somebody came to my door and my family was being threatened, then I would certainly fight back. So I'm kind of wondering how you feel about that.
Well, there are a lot of nonviolent ways to defend yourself. Peace talks is a great way of self-defense. This fact is intuitively known even for violent people, because when they find themselves in the position that enemy points gun on them and they point gun on enemy, they eventually start to talk instead of shooting. You can saw it on Westerns, for example. But non-violent self-defense starts from such way of life that you avoid to have enemies and refuse any invitations to enter in relations of animosity, which usually demand mutual consent no less than love. violent people many times asked me what I will do if I meet thugs on my way at twilight, for example. And they are usually puzzled when I answer that I meet only good people at streets, and I am open to conversation to anybody. It depends on your choice and skills in many ways, whether people around you are friends or enemies. This is peace culture. I am always trying to practice and develop it. Also, I signed Bilthoven Declaration of War Resisters International, which says that war is a crime against humanity, and therefore I am determined not to support any kind of war and to strive for the removal of all causes of war. It is part of peace culture too. As for prohibition to all men to leave Ukraine, this total mobilization of people and conscription and easy mobilization of war, all of this is part of culture of violence, which is the main cause of current two-track conflict, West versus East and Russia versus Ukraine. We need to develop consistent peace culture in the world to help people to understand that if you want peace, you should prepare for peace and make nonviolence a global norm in all ways. For example, I believe that conscription should be prohibited by international law. And when you protested against conscription and when this attempt to introduce military registration of women in United States was widely protested, and as I know, government in the end refused to continue this policy. It is great that people achieve that, because conscription, military registration, all forms of enforcement of conscription, preparation for conscription, it should be stopped, because it is just archaic and it is against human rights.
Okay, well, I'm going to disagree with you on that for a cynical reason, because I've always believed that, you know, one of the reasons we were able to end the war in Vietnam was because of our draft. And a lot of all men had to go fight. And right now, you know, it's only the poor that have to fight in this country. And so a lot of people can be very gung-ho about war when they and their children don't have to go fight and die. But let's move along. I and others have done shows basically saying that this invasion was not unprovoked, which is the adjective that the US politicians and the corporate media use every time. Now, that doesn't mean that I and others who advance this view think that what Putin did was moral or justified or legal by any means. We're pacifists. But we do believe that Russia has some legitimate security concerns that could have been addressed that might have prevented this invasion. So I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree with you that this invasion was not unprovoked. And I agree that Putin is not angel, as well as Zelensky. In this conflict of West against East and Russia against Ukraine, we should not demonize or absolve anybody, but we should investigate all alleged wrongdoings and restore justice, saying truth and insisting on responsibility on all sides. As for security concerns, Russia is caring about national security and sovereignty of great power over geopolitical sphere of influence, copying hegemonic attitude of United States. And Ukraine too cares only about this sovereignty, a power to do whatever a government wishes on its territory. Russian security concerns are understandable in logic of culture of violence, but they are subject to critique in framework of culture of peace and non-violence. Similarly, Ukrainian concerns about sovereignty over Crimea and Donbas are subject to critique, as well as United States rules-based international order concerns are subject to critique. We should criticize all these great power and sovereignty concerns. All these concerns are too hegemonic, and we need universal harmony based on culture of peace instead of particular hegemonies comfortable for actors driven by culture of violence. Since they draw red lines of their security concerns, I propose to draw red lines of sanity and common sense instead. Yeah. All stakeholders should bear in mind red lines of people of the world. No militarization and arms race by the cost of welfare, human rights, and environmental harmony. Nationalism and imperialism should step aside for development of inclusive, diverse, and fair democracy, and all conflicts should be settled peacefully. Any build-up of structural violence is intolerable, especially talking about war, preparation to war, or threats of war. That's red lines of people, and we should uphold that lines. No pretender to be sovereign should overstep these lines. I think that instead of sovereignty, we should insist on the notion of autonomy. It would be better. Yeah. Because sovereignty is arbitrary power and autonomy is power which is subordinated to reason. And we should transform these insane sovereignties into reasonable autonomies.
Okay. Putin has been talking about denazification, that's one of his reasons for going in. And the US says that's bunk. And they point to the small percentage of votes the neo-Nazi party got, Svoboda, I guess it was 2% in the last election, and the fact that Zelensky is Jewish. Now, it's true that they only got 2%, but the Azov Battalion, the neo-Nazi group, has been welcomed and widely integrated into the Ukrainian army and security forces. Can you talk about the presence of these neo-Nazis in Ukraine? The nature of Ukrainian nationalism and how that looks different from German Nazism, which was primarily against Jews.
First of all, there is some spooky image of Nazis, and there is some objective political description of what Nazis tried to do. Basically, Nazi, as well as their Italian allies, fascists, are tried to make all people one whole, exterminating minorities. And not just make all people one whole, but make all people army to conquer some sort of living space. And it is not just a unification of all people, but it is a permanent living in a fear of existential threat from the side of enemies. Creation of existential enemy which you should fight all your life. So it is a maximal expression of culture of violence. And Italian fascists, these unholy brothers of German Nazis, had their symbol of fasces. It is old ancient Roman Empire symbol of power. It is a bunch of sticks with axe in the center, and these sticks were used for corporal punishment. and this axe was used for decapitation. This fasces was symbol of power, aimed to make all people one whole and punish those who are not obeying discipline. And by the way, it is such ancient and respectable symbol that in United States, in House of Representatives, you can see this sculptural reliefs of fasces just in House of Representatives on both sides of podium. It is fastest.
Can we speak about the Azov battalion? How they
can you develop my thought? Yeah. So Azov battalion, as well as right sector, are very formal, literal users of some Nazi symbolics, followers of some this old Nazi teachings. Initially, there are a lot of them. Then they started to recruit more people, and probably not all here even know this crazy old Nazi teachings and meaning of this symbolics, like was Wolfsangel, which is Nazi symbol of included into emblem of Azov battalion and of Azov regiment. Because Azov battalion, it is a name of this military unit in the time when this war between government and voluntary military battalions of far right with pro-Russian separatists in Donbass began. Then this battalion was reformed. This voluntary battalion reformed into officially included into Armed Forces of Ukraine, Azov regiment. But this Azov regiment still have this Nazi symbolics, Wolfsangel, on its insignia. And also during this 8-year war between government and pro-government forces, basically Ukrainian side, and separatist and Russian military forces, basically pro-Russian side. On Russian side, there were neo-Nazi too. For example, it was Varyag battalion and Russian National Unity. So some sort of literal wannabe Nazis were on both sides. Okay. But this literal copying is not the main problem. The main problem is Ukrainian and Russian politics is so archaic that it is copying this basic structure of Nazi politics, which is all people should be united around one leader, and the main mission of people is considered to fight against existential threat, and the only aim of life of all people considered a victory. It is a sense of what is Nazi. You may not kill Jews. Your existential enemy may be anybody. real or not real. Not necessarily Jews, not necessarily communists, not necessarily perverts, but any existential enemy. Particular choice of existential enemy, not making you archaic polity like Nazis. What is really makes you archaic political structure as Nazis is this unity of people around the idea of hating and killing some existential enemy.
Okay, well, I really need to get you to be brief in these answers so that I can get through my questions. Is this threat of what Putin said he was going to do, which is to come in and denazify, was that a legitimate thing, or do you think that was just a pretext? And I understand now that the Soviet news agency TASS is claiming that they have eliminated the Azov battalion, which I find hard to believe. So I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
According to information in Ukrainian media, just this day at morning, I read some news about fight for Mariupol. I can't say what they mean, but the website of Azov battalion is still in the internet, and you can check their Twitter and so on. And some Western media are whitewashing Azov battalion. For example, I saw recent BBC reportage in which their correspondents came to leader of this battalion, Beletsky, and asked him, "Are you Nazi?" And he answered, "No, we are nationalists here, but it is all Russian propaganda," and so on. I think that Putin believes that Ukraine pose military threat to Russia, and he believes that Ukraine is ruled by Nazi. And this is because, of course, NATO is not so unharmful defensive alliance as they say, and it is of course because of these laws excluding Russian from public and particular political sphere in Ukraine, and it is of course because of this many marginal but still very influential followers of Nazi era Ukrainian nationalists such as Stepan Bandera in our politics, and some wannabes of Bandera may be marginal. But general idea of apologizing of Bandera and version of Ukrainian history as permanent existential fight against Russia as enemy is not marginal.
Right. Well, yeah. So I want to talk about what the Ukrainian people want. I don't want to rehash my entire show that I did with Bryce Green from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, which was about the Russian invasion was unprovoked. But I'm just skipping ahead to another question here. So we talked about how the U.S. fomented this coup in 2014 because the then democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, wanted to take the deal that Russia offered, which was better than the deal that the EU offered, because there was a lot of neoliberal things in there that they didn't want and ended up having to do after the coup, which we discussed. But the US couldn't have that, so we supported this regime that was supported by these neo-Nazis we were just talking about. And that's when the fighting began in the Donbass region that has killed 14,000 people already. And that regime was toppled by Zelensky, who was supposed to tackle corruption. But then the Pandora Papers showed that he's taken a lot of wealth and put it in offshore accounts. So I'm trying to figure out, where the Ukrainian people stand on Russia versus the EU, and what they think of Zelensky. And I imagine that the viewpoints are mixed, as they would be in any country, about their leaders and their allies. Or enemies. But I want to know what you think, and what do you think the majority, if you can speak for that, what the majority of the people of Ukraine support?
You know that pacifists are kind of people that denounce all warmongering national leaders, and of course, for such kind of people as pacifists, only the fact that Zelensky, Biden on one hand, and Putin on other hand are not negotiating but continuing this fight is, of course, a reason to criticize Putin and others who are named for this reluctance of negotiate peace in good faith. But about wider people, what the people want, it depends, on what kind of people are we talking about. It is either different kinds of people organized by someone, or different kinds of people created in our imagination by simple observation and discussion, or using more sophisticated scientific sociological models. Since peace is human right and one of basic needs of any sane person, I can assure you that any sane person wants peace. But since peace in Ukraine is widely denigrated as surrenderism, not all people dare to admit they want peace. And militant reaction to any pro-peace expression is also posturing, result of militarist political enterprise. People know something from education, mostly from loud propaganda. A lot of things people are not know at all. Such simple things influence on opinion polls. People see that they are expected to be all as one. This Fassi I mentioned, to unite around Zelensky in Ukraine, to hate and kill Russians. And this political enterprise is unfortunately successful. As well as in Russia, similar Putin's political enterprise is successful, as well as Hitler and Mussolini succeeded in similar political enterprises. With that introduction, I refer you to opinion polls published by Rating Group. 93% of population support Zelensky and believe Ukraine will win the war. Interestingly, peace talks between Zelensky and Putin support 74% of population, but 89% will not accept ceasefire without Russian army leaving Ukrainian territory. 45% of people concerned with inflation, 38% with deficit of fuel, and 13% with hunger. 86% of people support Ukraine joining European Union. 76% support joining of NATO. And 98% considers Russia enemy. So it is statistics of Rating Group. of course, we should understand that it is like phone calls. So when some sociologists call you at the time of war and asks some questions, you are probably will think before answer, and then this, of course, matter. But it is results which was published, and I know any other credible results and rating group is well-known and reputable agency in Ukraine.
Well, you know, that's interesting because what you're saying is true, that the propaganda on both sides is really going to affect how you stand, what your opinion is. And I think it's very strong in this country too. Another question that I wanted to ask you is, many of us on the left have been shocked at how easy it has been for the US to promote support for the fight against Russia, using the plight of the Ukrainian people to get sympathy for ordinary Americans. I mean, we're actually in this country talking about banning Russian vodka, even though most of it isn't even produced in Russia anymore, or banning and canceling Russian athletes and Russian artists. And I read that there was a university in Milan that was thinking of, you know, canceling a course on Dostoevsky, even though Dostoevsky was jailed for basically reading supposed banned books. You know, the irony is just tremendous. Now, of course, while we sympathize with people who are killed, injured, or forced to flee from their homes, we wonder why the same amount of concern has not been generated for other victims of wars in Yemen, Somalia, Gaza, Afghanistan, for instance. And I wonder if it's because, you know, those victims are Black and brown and they don't look like us, or is it because the US funds and arms these other countries who are waging these wars? So I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Well, of course, propaganda prepares people for integration of Ukraine into EU and NATO. Of course, it is a bit of racism in this different treatment of Ukrainians and people in Africa and Asia. Archaic culture of violence always includes such notions as racial superiority. So it is legitimate to talk about racism here. And also, answer to your question, you can find at the cover page of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. They said they had caricature: oil price rise, ride Ukrainians. A part of pure racism, it is indeed expectations of cheap but skilled labor force with common European Christian faith, similar labor ethics, and so on. And also this media creating a simple picture of us and them, good guys and bad guys. When you told about that, you probably mean some sort of, saying without investigation that Russians are just commit war crimes. Do you mean that?
Do I mean that? Or do the people that are saying the propaganda mean that?
Yeah.
I actually saw something, and I don't know exactly what the source was, but they were talking about the big brouhaha over the Russians supposedly bombing this maternity hospital. And the Russians say that it wasn't a maternity hospital anymore because they cleared out all the pregnant women because the Azov battalion took it over for a staging ground. And all the videos that came out on social media had this particular social influencer this woman who was in all the shots. First, she was lying down in the gurney that was coming down from the stairs. Then she was standing up outside the hospital, and it was the same woman. And we, based so much of our war crimes thing, that Russia is committing war crimes, on this attack on the maternity hospital. I was actually quite shocked to find an article in Newsweek magazine that said Russia could be doing a lot more against civilian populations. You yourself basically said that everything is still pretty much intact there in Kiev. They said they were really just kind of trying to take out the military strongholds and the military equipment. That's, of course, what the Russian news agency TASS said they actually did do. And that's why they said they're now going back to the eastern portion after having gone to the north and the south and the west.
Well, why Russians say that they are not targeting civilians? It may be one of two simple explanations. Either they are just lying to create a good image, or they say it to create a possibility for all military to claim after they said they didn't know about any plans of target civilians and excluding any mens rea from military crimes, or it can be genuine policy to avoiding unnecessary casualties among civilians. And basically what international humanitarian law demands, it is the last to avoid unnecessary casualties among civilians. And maybe such intention exists in political leadership, or maybe even in military leadership, to establish that, as well as to establish truth in a situation of Mariupol hospital. We need investigation. And I was shocked when I incidentally found in YouTube a Sky News video in which Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, in a video for kids, he says to kids that International Criminal Court already indicted and sentenced Putin for war crimes. He said that according to International Criminal Court, what Putin is doing is genocide and Putin is war criminal, which is not the case. It is just lie. I recorded and posted in YouTube a video entitled "Don't Lie Like Boris Johnson." It is easily foundable. To talk about war crimes on any side, it should be investigation, which would establish all elements of crime: criminal act, criminal intent, concurrence, causation, harm, attendant circumstances. From OSCE reports, it is certain that both sides violated Minsk agreements, and therefore objective investigation will find wrongs on all sides. And Russia illegally invaded Ukraine on the peak of violations of ceasefire, with many civilians reportedly killed both on government side and on non-government controlled areas. This one-sidedness, this bad guys versus good guys, and a tendency to absolve our heroes, it is indeed problematic. And it happens in wars that victors put all blame on enemies. And since all sides now consider themselves victors, they blame enemies and they refuse to negotiate. But talking about some objective things, of course, prior to Russian invasion, situation should be thoroughly investigated. After Russian invasion, of course, Russia does more pain to Ukraine than Ukraine continues to do pain to separatist regions. Proportion is 1 to 10, and there is objective way to measure it.
Yeah.
It is United Nations humanitarian data. During the months of Russian cruel military intervention to Ukraine, the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights reported 2,788 civilian casualties, including 1,081 killed. And these figures, of course, are likely much higher, but it is what is proved, because they have a system of corroboration, which includes any data should be corroborated by 3 sources. So it is indeed a data which worth trust. And these statistics, near 3,000 of civilian casualties, it includes 283 civilian casualties in the non-governmental controlled areas, including 59 killed people. And talking about refugees who went abroad, it is generally international borders of Ukraine crossed by 3.7 million refugees, and 271,000 of refugees fled to Russia. In both cases, we have this proportion of pains of war 1 to 10.
Okay, I get it. Okay.
Proportion in that Russia does 10 times pain more for Ukraine during last month than Ukraine does pain to separatists.
Okay, I gotta move along because we're gonna go over the hour, but I want to get to all the content. The reason that I brought up this whole war crimes thing is I think there's a certain narrative that we need to create in order to escalate this. And the next part of that narrative is whether Putin is using chemical or biological weapons. We're hearing so much talk about chemical and biological weapons. It's reminding me of the weapons of mass destruction that we talked about, Iraq having, which was our justification for getting into that war. Or the fact that, we said that Saddam Hussein was gassing his own people, or Assad in Syria was gassing his own people. That chemical attack that Sy Hersh disproved came from Assad in 2014 caused the US to go into Syria and extend the war. Russia and Assad were dispensing with ISIS very quickly, and they would have done so a lot sooner had we not come in, started aiding the al-Nusra Front, which was an outgrowth of al-Qaeda, and we made many more people die and flee and turn that into a failed state pretty much. And that's what I'm worried about, happening in Ukraine, either turning it into another Syria and Afghanistan, or worse, with the use of nuclear weapons. Because there was a whole article in the New York Times the other day about these smaller nuclear weapons that can do less damage. And they were talking about different names, different warheads that they could put on these missiles that could do as little as 2% of the damage in Fukushima, or as much as 50% of the damage in Fukushima, where only 90 million people would die. And this kind of talk to me is crazy that we're even considering this, but this is the way, the military-industrial complex thinks. So I'm really worried about, what is going to happen here. And I would like to know your viewpoints about what realistic options are available to have a solution. I mean, I was thinking that if the US really wanted peace, then Biden would have gone over and hosted a meeting between Zelensky and Putin instead of just going over to the NATO allies. But, I don't think such a meeting is possible now that he let slip in his remarks yesterday, which I was shocked to hear him say that they should, have regime change in Russia and get rid of Putin. Now, he's saying that he didn't mean that, but I think that's very disingenuous. So I want to know what you think is going to happen, first of all, realistically. What would the two sides agree to at this point? Which of these do you think that Zelensky with the U.S., backing him, would allow, Russia to have any of its security concerns allayed? Or do you think this is just going to get worse?
Well, first of all, this scares about nuclear war and Russia invading Europe, it have price, and some people are beneficiaries of solving this fears. Boeing and Lockheed Martin are producing parts of nuclear weapons, these missiles and so on, and their stocks are growing in prices at stock market. And such companies as Raytheon, which, as we know, American Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is linked, former member of their board. Their stocks are also rising because they are producing these weapons which are purchased and delivered to Ukraine, to this war. And this rearming of Europe, more military expenditure, which expected now from Europe, and many governments just are doing what American strategists and NATO generals are suggesting, and Pentagon and so on. When someone is threatening your nuclear war, it is just talk of merchant who sail nukes. And when someone selling you idea of Putin invading Europe, it is also a way to profit from arming Europe to the teeth. And of course, if instead of this warmongering and this creation of more and more animosity between the West and East, if more information in media will be about realistic ways of achieving universal peace, development of peace culture, creation of non-violent global governance, it could be indeed a way to achieve peace on earth. I agree with you that absence of United States at negotiation table means that United States pushes for war and will not negotiate peace. And since Ukrainian government and public opinion is under control of United States hawks via many influence networks and unified warmongering media, Ukraine shares United States unwilling to negotiate peace. I don't think that realism means any sort of accepting militarist great power balance. Realism for me is a vision of how to make real our best dreams by our hard work. While militarist realism claims it can establish peace either by military victory or regime change or territorial concessions and concessions in geopolitical alignment, I reject all these ideas because it will not bring peace. It will only resolve some internal contradictions in culture of violence. My realism is based on the idea that pacifists will teach people culture of peace and non-violence, and will report in media about peaceful life, and will research and develop technologies of non-violent life of people. too, like we did before and already achieved a lot. This realism of peace culture will eventually develop powerful institutions of nonviolent global governance. And we will live on the planet without armies and borders, where Ukraine, Donbass, and Crimea will be one whole, along with United States, China, and even Russia. And instead of hegemonies, we will have harmony, and our great powers will be not East and West, but truth and love.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful bedtime story I'd like to tell my children. Unfortunately, I have a less sanguine view of human nature than you do. I remember studying philosophy and John Locke's, benign view of human nature versus Thomas Hobbes' more malevolent view of human nature. And I think it's kind of a mixture of both. I certainly would love to see what you're talking about taught. I know that I saw it with small children. We had anti-bullying curricula in all of the schools that my two sons went to when they were little. And it's just, I think it's a great dream. But quite frankly, you mentioned the word realism. John Mersheimer was a big proponent of that, a professor at University of Chicago. And he was the one who said a long time ago that war is inevitable based on the U.S. trying to force Ukraine into NATO. And he was saying that it's like the U.S. has our Monroe Doctrine. We would never allow any Russian bases or any military installations at all in our Western Hemisphere. And in fact, when the Cuban, when there was the missile crisis in Cuba, we had a big scare over that, but Kennedy and Khrushchev were able to peacefully resolve it. So, I mean, what did we think was going to happen if we kept taunting Russia to put all those bases on there? So I do think, from what I've been hearing, like the Carnegie Institute for Peace and the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, they're talking about these kinds of compromises, like let's just give Russia Crimea, let's accept that's part of Russia. Let's have the permanent independence of these two separatist regions. Let's have it in the Ukrainian constitution that they're not going to ever join NATO. I mean, I think, personally, that I think it conceivably could be resolved with these kinds of trade-offs. But I just think that Biden yesterday made it a lot more difficult for that to happen. And I don't really know what's motivating Putin at this point, because in addition to his invasion being immoral, illegal, criminal, the whole 9 yards, it kind of was stupid from his point of view, because all it did was unite all of Europe against him. I mean, Michael Hudson, the economist, has a great article that we just defeated Germany for the third time, because Germany and France and some other European countries were starting to cozy up to Russia and China more. They had 30% of their oil from Russia, 40% of their gas. With Nord Stream 2 going online, it was going to be 80% of their gas. And of course, we couldn't have that because Obama quadrupled fracking and expedited LNG export services. And now, not only are the weapons manufacturers profiting greatly from this war, but the fossil fuel companies are as well. And we're going back to drill, baby, drill in this country at a time when the recent IPCC report has come out and said, we don't have any more time. Both the poles are 30 and 40 degrees hotter this time of year than they were. And it's just crazy that we're now talking about, doing more extraction of fossil fuels. So I'm extremely pessimistic about, whether there's going to be peace, because I follow the money and I see a lot of these major industries are making a lot of money off of this war. And my worry is the two existential threats, of course, which is nuclear annihilation and climate and the climate crisis. So,
well, in many ways, what is you saying is true. It is true in logics of culture of violence, and of course, John Mearsheimer is a great realist in this logics of culture of violence. If for some people Putin is like crazy dictator, John Mearsheimer explains motives of Putin better. You know, this sort of violent realism is, of course, not a pacifist realism. As I said, realism for me, it is like planning of make real your dreams, and any people do that. But for representatives, consistent representatives of culture of violence, it is great power competition produced by culture of violence, this cruel anti-human agreement to disagree between hegemonic sovereigns, in which they try to profit from limited blows against each other while not damaging each other to such degree when nukes may be launched. Incentives for waging war differ depending on source of culture of violence. For the West, it is seemingly profits of merchants of death. For the East, it is seemingly growing power of autocrats and militant isolationists. But you know, there are autocrats in Western corporations and militant populists and isolationists in mainstream politics. And there are corrupt profiteers on the East too. So culture of violence in many ways is objectively universal in its expressions, as well as culture of peace. And of course, what pacifists are trying to do is transforming this archaic culture of violence into a progressive culture of peace. As for Putin, as for rationality of Putin, is Putin crazy? Well, Putin is rational in his own way. His mind is poisoned by culture of violence and corrupted by temptations of military stratagems, but he said that he is not willing to conquer Ukraine, and he possibly mean it. Only Ukrainian propagandists insist he is trying to liquidate Ukraine, but their back thoughts are that Putin pushes for other Ukraine, less hostile to Russia and less useful in Western hostility to Russia. Of course, for militant nationalists, there will be no Ukraine without war with Russia. And it is what is unacceptable for Putin. I doubt so that people in mass will share that view that it will be no Ukraine without war with Russia. If, of course, people will be allowed to know and discuss different views. And I said that because Zelensky is an authoritarian leader and he tries to shut up all voices critical to him, like Putin did, and Putin, of course, is more authoritarian in many ways, because in Putin's Russia, I probably had no opportunity to speak to you. I probably, as my friends in Russia, will be blamed like foreign agents, and even maybe as Navalny have a long jail term, or maybe even killed like Nemtsov. Of course, there is a lot more authoritarianism in Russia, but you know, last years, during escalation of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, I see dangerous tendency that Ukraine, in many ways, is copying Russian authoritarianism. And such things happen during wars when conflicting sides are starting to copy bad behavior of each other.
well, let me interrupt for a second.
I hope that Ukraine will not persist in this copying of Russian authoritarianism, because now we are sanctioned pro-Russian media. We started persecution of pro-Russian political figures, and recently Ukrainian Security Council decided to ban mainstream pro-Russian party, Opposition Bloc for Life.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you about, because I heard just the other day that the timing of the Russian, a couple of years ago, putting the forces, or was it a couple of months ago? Maybe it was a couple of months ago, putting the forces on all their troops on the border had to do with Zelensky purging the parliament of pro-Russian parliament members and jailing them for treason. And then I heard just the other day, he shut down like 10 left-wing media sites. But then I read that those media sites weren't really left-wing in the way that we would think of them. So, sometimes I don't know what to believe.
As journalist, you should check all information that came to you. Talking about political repressions in Ukraine, it is real repressions against pro-Russian figures. But people like pacifists, like, for example, some leftist human rights defenders and some marginal politicians, because since in Ukraine and in Russia, mainstream politics is about popular unity against enemy, it is basically not left politics, because left politics, it is more caring about our people than about fighting any foreign people. Here is too, of course, some people may confuse it. For some people, Stalinism is like left, but it is not. Stalinism, it is, of course, far right policy.
Yeah. Well, I'm just concerned about this country because you see so many left-wing people. I mean, I used to make a distinction between liberals and progressives, and the liberals who watch, Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, who was one of the biggest cheerleaders for the Russiagate BS. They are now the people that are talking about a no-fly zone, and they don't understand, I think, a lot of them, that a no-fly zone will lead to World War III. But what has started to worry me is when I now see some of my Bernie Sanders supporting progressive friends talking with the same point of view. And that really scares me. So I want, you to close the show today by telling those people who call themselves progressives, what advice do you give them as far as, what they're seeing in the American media? What should they think about what's going on in your country? And what would you like them to be calling for?
I think that first of all, we should remember some basic truth. War is bad and peace is good. Like that, just like that. That all people have a right to peace. And it is always better to talk, not to shoot. Such simple, basic things. When some representatives of warmongering civil society of Ukraine are talking about you should not call to peace talks. You should not focus on humanitarian aid because we desperately need a lot of weapons to kill Russians. Just remember what is your core vision of the world, how you imagine future. You imagine future as permanent war, then of course you can support these calls to more NATO engagement, to escalation of conflict between West and East, to making enemy not only from Russia but from China too. And for building of this world which described dystopian world which described Orwell in this famous novel 1984, with three great powers constantly fighting each other, killing a lot of people, doing a lot of damages and pains, but quietly people who have power in all of these great states are happy to continue this war for ad infinitum. Do we need this world? Do we need to live according to our fears? Do we need to increase our fears and suggest people that realism is living according to your fears and fighting against existential enemy, internal enemy, and external enemy? It is not good picture of future. Instead of living according to our fears, we should choose to live according to our hopes. And it is realistic. It is realistic to develop knowledge, technologies of non-violent governance, social institutions intended to minimize level of violence in government and progressively minimize violence to zero.
Yeah.
It is ideally violence as well as global heat. It is things which should be decreased.
Yeah.
And to decrease level of violence to zero is the best idea which we can and should realistically make to happen.
Okay, we got to leave it there. I really love your vision. I really hope to see it happen someday in my lifetime, if not in my kids' lifetime, because otherwise there aren't going to be any more lifetimes for any of us. So I want to thank you very much. I want you to stay safe over there.
Thank you.
I wish safety and peace for your people and people all over the world. And I'm not going to end my show the way I always do, which is where I say keep fighting, because of course I always mean that in the metaphorical sense. But I'm
keep
not
talking, you can say.
All right.
Keep
fighting,
loving.
Keep fighting for peace. I know that sounds like a oxymoron, but thank you very much, Yurii. And everybody share the show, please. I am still in Facebook jail. Ironically, when I did my show, the Russian invasion was not unprovoked. I was reported, and it's been 2 weeks now. I am unable to post in Facebook groups. And so it's very unfortunate. And I do need all of you to share this show on your pages, on your Twitter account, and in any groups that you're in. Thank you very much. Thank you, Yurii. And everybody have a great week.
Thank you, Lauren.